Well, welcome back to another day of Bible study. Here we are in our final week of Bittersweet. My name is Kevin Young. I have the privilege of serving here at Christ Table as lead clergy. If you'd like to know more about Christ Table, visit the URL that's right there, www.christstable.today. Would encourage you whenever you get there to sign up for the email list so that you will know everything that's happening around here at Christ Table. Now, we are coming close to the end of this study. We're about 3/4 of the way through as of today. You can still get involved in this study. Each and every day stands on its own. You can get materials in order to help you out on that journey right there at the URL in front of me, go.christstable.today/bittersweet. There's a downloadable schedule of all the days, as well as the readings that go along with that day, as well as a PDF curriculum absolutely free that you can attain there. There's also a chance to get the printed copy of that curriculum, as well as some other resources that go along with the study. Just click on the button there that says get the box. And I will say that if you're joining us in the middle of this, you can definitely go back to the very beginning on the archive. Wherever you're watching this, those should be archived, and just begin at the beginning and catch back up with us to where we are. Today, we continue. Why don't I talk about this first? If you haven't already heard, Reconstruct Your Faith makes a great doorstop, makes a great book for those Thanksgiving people around the table that you might want to give them something to think about. Makes a great Christmas gift if you know someone who is disconnected, discouraged, done with the church, or has doubts or questions, just trying to navigate deconstruction and where to go in their faith. This is a great place for you to start. It talks about my own journey, as well as the early church, and how the early church utilized certain and specific processes and practices in order to help people through journeys just like the ones that I discussed and the people that you know. You can find out more information about that at drkevinyoung.com, and you can get that book wherever books are sold. So we're working our way through the book of 1 Peter, a book that is written to those who are suffering and enduring persecution, not American-style church persecution and suffering, but like real being burned at the stake, suffering and persecution. So the things that Peter has to say here are very much directed towards them and towards real and true persecution, but it may well be that we can find some things that are helpful for us and instructive for us as well as we pay attention to what Peter says to them, looking over the shoulder as he has conversations. We find ourselves now today on day 17 in 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 through 16. And so we are throttling towards the end, but we're not quite there yet. One of the people that you may not be aware of, in fact, you may have heard of this name, but not necessarily be aware of this person who their story is William Tyndale. William Tyndale is a name that goes back to actually before the King James Version of the Bible. And so King James Version, very old, 4 or 5 centuries old. William Tyndale goes back actually before then and was the individual who first translated the scriptures into the English language. Before then, it was written in languages that could only be read by clergy who had been trained in those ancient and dead languages. And that was actually intentional. It was intentional because they didn't necessarily want the common man and the common woman to be able to understand what was in the Bible, because it might give up control. They said it might cause heresy to filter in. Maybe there has been some of that, but I think that most of us would say that the Bible being written in a language that can be read by the individual, not just read to the individual, has been a beneficial thing. In those days, though, nobody was really happy with William Tyndale for doing it. At least not the religious clergy were happy for doing that. William Tyndale, though, did not have enough money to really finish the project. He had enough money to finish kind of the first pass and the rough draft, but not complete it and not get second revisions done. And so he actually started selling copies that were rough around the edges in order to raise enough money to be able to finish the project. But the clergy were so upset about it that they decided to buy up all of the copies that he had imprinted of this kind of really difficult rough draft and burned them. And so Bishop of London essentially did that, bought up all the copies. The problem was that whenever they did that, though they were burning the first copy of the book of the Bible, of the first copies of the Bible that William Tyndale had translated into English, and nobody got to read the first copies because they bought them all and burned them. Their purchase of all of those first copies actually funded Tyndale to finish the second version of it. So it ended up actually backfiring that they bought them all and burnt them, because it gave them the ability to actually do it and finish it. And then at that point, there was really no stopping it. In fact, William Tyndale's version of the Bible in English actually is the foundation for a lot, even most, of what is in the King James Version of the Bible. Sometimes I think that similar things happen to us. We believe that we are doing something that is right and well and good, preventing something, but then it ends up that the thing that we are trying to keep from happening, the actions and decisions that we make, actually end up bringing that thing to pass that we did not want to come to pass because of the things that we did. Sometimes that's referred to as a self-fulfilling prophecy. Well, whenever we come to the passage today in 1 Peter chapter 4, we're going to kind of see a discussion about that idea happening. Dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery trials that you are going through as if something strange were happening to you. Don't be surprised about all this persecution. Don't be surprised about all this trauma and trial that you're going through. Instead, be very glad, for these trials make you partners with Christ in his suffering, so that you will have wonderful joy, so that you will have the wonderful joy of seeing his glory when it is revealed to all of the world. So this bad thing that is happening is actually the key, or the only path maybe to get to some good things. These trials that you're going through actually make you partners with Christ and with his suffering. And because of that, because of those trials and because of that identification, you have now unlocked this new level. You're going to have the wonderful joy of seeing his glory when it is revealed to all the world. So if you are insulted by others because you bear the name of Christ, you will be blessed. Through your pain and persecution, blessing comes, for the glorious Spirit of God rests upon you. If you suffer, however, and now Peter's coming back to an idea that he has outlined several times in the past, so it must be a really big deal that he keeps coming back to this, because he's talking about suffering, he's talking about persecution, he's talking about how blessing and good will come out of that, but now he is back again to this idea, but there is some persecution that does not receive those blessings. There is some persecution that does not unlock that next level with Christ. There is some persecution which is brought upon yourself for the things that you do. If you suffer and you're a Christian, it must not be for murder, for stealing, for making trouble, for prying into other people's affairs. It must not be deserved. But it's no shame to suffer for being a Christian. If you suffer for being a Christian, there's no shame in that. Praise God for the privilege of being called by his name. But and the implication here is, but if you suffer for murder, for stealing, for making trouble, for prying into other people's affairs, well, there is shame in that. And there should be guilt in that. And don't be surprised whenever you receive the due response that you should have received for doing those things that were wrong. Don't blame that on God, and don't expect a blessing from God if you're a Christian and you're getting persecuted for things that are wrong. And we see this all the time, though it may not be the same level of persecution. We see in this day and age all the time Christians behaving badly and then crying persecution whenever they receive the response that is well deserved for the way that they behave. Whenever you act badly in the public sphere as a Christian, whenever you treat other people badly and say, well, love the sinner, hate the sin. It's my responsibility to point out this truth to you, to ignore the plank in my own eye in order to try to pick out the little speck in your eye. Whenever you receive rebuke, pushback, boundaries, and blocks because you act that way, don't go crying to Jesus. And Peter says, certainly don't expect a blessing from Jesus because you acted like Balaam's ass. Actually, Balaam's ass was a good one in the story, right? Because you acted like Balaam. Balaam's ass was in the right. Don't expect a blessing whenever you are a curse. Don't expect something good to happen to you whenever you are a bad individual in the way that you act. That's what Peter is saying here. He's reminding them, if you are to suffer, if you are to be persecuted, it better darn well be because of doing good, not because of rebellious behavior. And I'm not so sure that there is not a more perfect time in the world for Christians to hear that statement than this one here, than this era. Go Taylor. If you're going to suffer, it better well be for doing good. And the things that you're doing, that you're suffering for, are not doing good. You're not doing good. You have convinced yourself of things that are not true. You're rebelling against the way God said to treat others. And you're trying to use the Bible to justify it. It just isn't going to happen. And you may think that you've convinced everybody, but you will not convince God. The other thing that I think is good here, which is a little over the same lines, and before we move along and finish today's study, I also want to make sure that we point this out as well. Peter essentially says here, suffering for the name of Christ or being a Christian is acceptable. Suffering for doing bad things is unacceptable and deserving. You see, if you suffer, if you are persecuted, Peter says, that's acceptable. That's okay. You should feel no guilt or shame for that. But, and I love that word unacceptable. If you are suffering for doing bad things, that's unacceptable and deserving. And you're going to have to deal with the consequences of that on your own. Jesus ain't going to come and rescue you from that. He's not going to give you a pat on the back for that. You're not going to receive open doors and great blessings because of those things. Check yourself. So before we go today, I want to remind you to, if you've not already, visit that URL, go.christstable.today/bittersweet. Download the resources there. Also, don't remember, those 3 little emotion icons there. Make sure that if you have our printed curriculum, if you receive the box, to go ahead to today's curriculum and let us know how you're feeling there. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can always send those to us or post those on any of the days in which you are watching this. Love to hear the feedback from you about what you're thinking, what you're learning, where your life is going. And we'll look forward to being back with you tomorrow as we continue on in Bittersweet. But until that time,